Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chats with Bess and the start of the series in collaboration with GenUnity, an organization that helps inform, educate, and shape leaders to be leaders in their communities. Today, we are talking with one of those leaders that I've had the pleasure of meeting because I am a GenUnity Fellow. And we're going to talk to her about her experience, not only with the organization, but with community leadership. So, Gina, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Bessie. Thank you for having me. This is
Of
very
course.
exciting.
Thank you. So, let's start with the very basics. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how, whether it was in college or through your first jobs or whatever, how did you come about getting involved with community?
Mhm. Hi, everybody. My name is Gina, and I am a first generation Dominican American who was raised in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So I'm about like 30 minutes up north from Boston, still in the greater Boston area. I went to high school at the Notre Dame Cristo Rey High School. It changed names, but I bring it up because that was my first kind of involvement with community action in general. I remember I used to volunteer at a couple soup kitchens here in Lawrence, and I was just really trying to understand what does community organizing look like, right? Like, what does it mean to be with other people? And then, after that, I went to the College of the Holy Cross where I got a scholarship. Yay, Holy Cross. Thank you for hooking me up with that. But that was really exciting because I got the opportunity to work with a couple of multicultural organizations and there was a need for it, right? Because as students of color, we didn't have the space to be ourselves, because I was often challenged by other people in very different spaces. And, playing your music, eating your food was always something that was kind of weird. So, we really clung on to these multicultural organizations, and that's how I got like formally into organizing, right? So I served as like a social media kind of person on the Latin American Student Organization. I was part of the BSU, part of CASA, the Caribbean Student Association, and a number of different things. And then I went abroad, and I studied abroad in Peru. And while I was there, I was feeling like I didn't understand like where I fit in, right? I'm a curly haired girl in a Southern American place, and I was looking around and I was like, I don't feel like anybody looks like me here. And I was having, and that's kind of been my question of life, right? Since I moved here, since my family came here, since I moved to Lawrence, since I went to college, I was like, there's nobody, I don't understand where I fit in. And then I started getting involved with an organization in Peru that was for Afro-descendant Peruvians. And that was the first time I remember seeking this out so bad, right? That I volunteered at this event in far away. I had no idea. I got there by the grace of God, literally. I don't remember how I got there, but I was sitting in a space and I was looking around and I was like, wow, there's Black people here, right? Just like me, just like my mom, just like my sisters. And we were talking about the same thing, hair, right? And how much of an issue hair was. And not having access to curly hair products, or, feeling like people have the right to touch you or the right to invade your space. So I thought that was really cool because, community organizing kind of transcends. It's something that's so natural to us as human beings, but we try to fight it so often. So then after that, I kind of wanted to stay abroad. So I engaged in a Princeton and Latin America fellowship in the Dominican Republic, which is where my family is from. And I stayed there for about 2 years. And, I was working with an organization that was focused on education. So K-12 education. And I was responsible for like forming their marketing department. And it was really something that I took on because I felt like representation matters, right? Like who you see, who's around you, how you're depicted, what stories they tell about you matters, right? And it matters to funders obviously. It matters to the people of the community. It matters to even your self-esteem and your image, right? When you see yourself represented in other people. So that was like kind of the sentiment that I led the marketing development with. And I was very happy to say that I did what I sought out to do. And that's where I learned just the strength of like community for the sake of community, right? That like oftentimes, there's often this narrative or this feeling of like people from the outside coming in and feeling like they have more experience because of their titles, their education, etc. And the reality is that nobody knows their community as good as the people that have lived there their entire lives, right? And that's kind of shifted the way that I look at community organizing, right? When I'm not from that area, when I'm not from that part, it's about elevating the voices that are there and giving space and serving them instead of the other way around.
Can you talk a little bit about how, when you are forming that community, those barriers can be overcome, or how have you overcome those barriers when helping create community?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, I see it in a couple of different stages. I feel like the first thing that I did, I was feeling all of that, I was feeling overwhelmed. I felt like I had gotten stuck in time for 2 years because I wasn't here. I felt like my friends were doing a lot of different things that I felt like I had to catch up. That's how I felt, just as somebody who understands the Massachusetts landscape, has gone to school here, has helped my parents navigate all of this. I still felt like I was a little bit behind. And I think what I found comfort in is understanding that my superpower is to talk to people and to build those bridges. And I can build those bridges one person at a time, right? So I tried not to get really overwhelmed, and just try to make those connections. I feel like that's what kind of pushes the work forward too. It's understanding that everybody has a very different truth, right? And our job as people is to wear the hat of listeners, right? Like we need to listen to each other. And I feel like that's the hardest thing to do when you're just, especially within this very individualistic American mentality that you are supposed to be, you do you, your neighbor does whatever they got to do, right? And we talk to each other on the 4th of July, right? Like that's kind of what it feels like all the time. And that was the biggest culture shock for me when I came back, because even my sister the other day said it to me, that I walk around the street and I say hi to everybody and I have a conversation with everybody, and that she finds that annoying. And I'm like, well, why? Well, why? Like, like the lady at Target, her name was Regina. And I was like, oh, that's a cool name. My name is Gina. And then we had a whole conversation about that, right? Like something really small can connect you with somebody else, but you have to be really willing and open to put yourself out there in that way, and to be rejected too, that some people just don't want to talk to you, and that's okay, right? But kind of going through life and understanding that at the end of the day, what we have is like the experiences that we have from each other, right? Like all this material stuff, it matters in the moment because you need it to survive, right? And it creates launching points for you to be able to do more. But hearing a story from somebody in your neighborhood, or an experience that you have never been a part of, or understanding that somebody lives a very different reality than you do, that teaches you that, like, those are the lessons that I kind of seek in life. So the facilitation came a little weird to me. And I say a little bit because I was not expecting to like jump into facilitation, because I'd been working in marketing, representation. I was more on like the creative media side. But I felt a little like fed up with social media, to be honest, with the way that we have to paint ourselves on social media. So that was part of my internal.
Exactly. Yeah, everything's perfect.
Everything's perfect. Even, everything's perfect. And even the struggle is perfect. And I'm like, like that's not what I want to do. Like, I'm more than happy to assist in visions and creating, and getting down to the real narrative, but I'm over that. But where I found my superpower was when I started working with GenUnity in the facilitation space. And I realized I'm just like, my hat here is just to make sure that people are listening to each other. And that's difficult to make, if you're in a room with somebody, let's say a conservative, way, way far off. And then you have somebody who's really progressive, right? And we see the divide that there is in this country in general, for politics, rights, Roe v. Wade, right? That just happened, guns, whatever the case may be, right? It's really difficult to listen to someone that has so many different opinions from you, because the first thing that we do is react, right? We don't listen for the sake of understanding, we listen to react. And that's something that I've been practicing a lot more and have been seeking out, because I really want to understand why people think the way they do, and what their experience, how their experiences shape them in that way, to think about things in that way, and their relation to community, right?
So, Gina, talk to us a little bit about how GenUnity started, and then how you came into it, and what you're doing now with the organization.
So GenUnity came about in 2020, right? So we had our first pilot program, and it's really the vision of Jaren Chang and Amisha Ganesh. So they're part of they're co-founders, and they really thought about trying to solve the issue of like adult learning and awareness within the city of Boston through a very different model, right? So, you spoke about talking to community partners, and what we really do is we don't position ourselves as experts. We position ourselves as being really good at creating spaces where people can listen to each other, right? We create the conditions, and we seek out partners like, people in the community leaders, nonprofits, people in the public and private sector, state representatives, right, who have done the work, continue to do the work, so they can inform cohort members like you and other people who are just trying to learn and trying to understand not only their position, right, like what can they do within their sphere, but how can they influence the sphere of someone else, right, the reality of someone else. So that's a little bit about GenUnity. And we move through our cohorts, which are, about 33 to 40 adults. And we specifically choose adults, right? Because I think that there's this very misconception that we should invest a lot of money in our kids, which is a reality, and we should, right? But there's still a lot of work to be done in the adult learning space, right? I think that oftentimes after the age of 16 or 18, traditionally in some communities, right, you don't think about education, right? There's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to be taught. And the reality is that as adults, we learn the same way that we did as kids, right? By exposure, by having conversations, by being hands-on, right? So we try to promote and bring a lot of that work into the format of conversations that we have. As of right now, we do them in a virtual space, which has created a lot more accessibility for folks who are coming to us from like the greater Boston area, right? So we don't have to be all in person, but there's still opportunities to engage in person. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, so I got involved with GenUnity through a link of an organization that I was working with called Everyday Boston. And Jaren was, looking around for facilitators, and, I had an initial conversation with him. So I joined the team, the first pilot program on housing and eviction with Jaren and Amisha as a facilitator. And I thought, I was really amazed by the depth of the conversations that we were having, because I know that oftentimes when we engage in these spaces, it's really hard to call out, and we're with different people, right? People that are different across gender, class, race, right? Even sexual orientation. And it's really hard to call out things like systemic racism and feel like you are not gonna, that you don't have to put up a defense with that kind of thing. So we really try to encourage folks to be their most authentic selves, right? Whichever way you're standing on the political spectrum, whatever your opinion is, right? Come as you are, right? You're part of this community too. Because that's another thing. I think oftentimes when we think about doing the work, we think about a certain group of people doing the work, right? And for a long time in this country, there's been this emphasis on like, well, Black people are oppressed. We don't know by whom. Right? People of color are oppressed. I don't know who, right? But it's their responsibility to do the work. When the reality is that it's all of our responsibilities to do. Like, we all have a stake in this game, right? Whether you're a very affluent person, white person living in Boston, or you're not, right? You still have something that you have a role to play in the way that we can liberate and we can help people within our community. So I felt very called by that work because I felt like it brought a lot of meaning to me, right? Since, I had grown up in Lawrence, I feel like the first bit of anchor that I felt towards the situation that I was living in was after college, after I think like winter break, my first year, I came back and I had taken a couple classes about like race, and I had started to understand a little bit more about why Lawrence was the way that it was.
Mhm.
And I remember when I was in high school, I just thought Lawrence was Lawrence, right? Like, things here, we're on Section 8 because we're on Section 8. We're on EBT because we're on EBT. I have to ask the nuns at my school for uniform because I have to, right? Like we're just poor because we're poor, right? Like I don't understand anything else beyond that. And it wasn't until college that I started to understand, like, wait, no, like there were systems in place that have perpetuated the way that I'm living, right? Even though I'm first generation, even though my family is not from here, right? We came into a system that was not designed to favor people that look like us, especially those that have been here for a very long time. So, and I felt really passionate about having those conversations, those very real, honest conversations, even if people were on very different sides of the conversation, because at least we were having the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the most important thing. So, in last year, Darren and Amisha decided to expand and hire a program manager, and I was there and I was like, I'm here, please hire me. And literally, that's what I said. And they laughed the same way that you did. And, it's been a dream ever since, because I get to work in a space where not only is my voice being heard and my opinions, but I think we're also just rethinking the way that we work as a team, right?
Mhm.
Like, is the hierarchy of the team. There is no hierarchy, right? I work with two co-founders who are like, tell me, Gina, what do I gotta do? Right? Instead of this, I hired you, you gotta do this, right? Which has been very, very much of a relief.
So that is the GenUnity story and how you came to be with the organization now, and collaborate to make these cohorts even more impactful for more applicants, like who become fellows, sort of like me. But now, looking forward, for you personally and for the organization as a whole, what do you hope for, right? Because you can create as many fellows as you want, but what is the end goal?
That's a really good question. And it kind of speaks to our model of diversity and what what our communities look like, right? So I think one of the things that we've been trying to figure out is, right, like what is everybody getting out of this? Like, what's one common thing that they share coming out of this experience? And the one thing that comes to mind is exposure, right? I think oftentimes we're not taught to sit in these spaces, right, and really demand to ask questions and have the courage to ask questions. So I think that that's one of the things, like one of the core competencies of our program, is that people feel like they have the right to ask the question, right? And they can connect with people that are there to help them, right? And to service them. And when you talk about the action plan, or, the project that everybody kind of comes up with and engages on, it's really about taking inventory and looking to see, where can I make change, right? Like really proximate change within my sphere, right? So for some people that might look like, we had a member from the last cohort who was looking around. He's a mortgage broker, and he was looking and he was like, well, we don't have an application in Spanish. We should do an application in Spanish. We should do an application in Creole, in different languages. But for some other people, it might be, wow, I have the right to be in this space, right? So I think that because of the diversity of our community and what it looks like, people come from very different walks of life and they take away very different things. But I think what remains constant is that we're going to continue to have the conversation, right? We're going to continue to create space for people to have the conversation. And the reality is that some people, they take away what they want, right? And maybe they're not ready to hear the rest. And that's okay, right? Because they showed up, right? And they're going to continue to show up. And I think from what we want to happen, right, is that eventually there's enough Bessies out there, right? And there's enough people out there who have become more conscious of the issue and are working together, right, to fix it, right? To work within the system to be like, hey, maybe the Section 8 process doesn't have to be this restrictive. Or maybe we can rethink the way that we do EBT and food security in this country, right? So I think it's empowering everyday adults to really think about the fact that they have a stake in the work that's being done. I think oftentimes on a civic level, we just assume that the responsibility will be we elect representatives, right? We elect these people into office, but it's also making sure that they are being held accountable to the work that they're doing for us, right? The people that elected them into office. And I know that that's not something that's really easy to learn, right? To step into that power, because it is power that we have as a collective, to move policy, to move change, to persuade our representatives to do the right work, right? And not be persuaded by other people. I think from a GenUnity standpoint, like as an organization, I think we're looking to continue to have these programs in the city of Boston and to expose as many Bostonians and people from Massachusetts to the work as possible. But I think at a larger level, we're also looking to expand, right? So we're looking to go to other cities and replicate the same model with other community partners, because again, who knows their community better than the people that are there, right? That have been there their entire lives. And I think on a personal level, I just want to continue to learn how to make these spaces more efficient for people, right? And more accessible and less intimidating, because I know that having these conversations is hard. I'm in it every day, right? So when things like, for example, the Buffalo Massacre come up or Roe v. Wade, I don't feel surprised by any of that anymore, right? But I know that it's a shock to the system, to a lot of other people, right? Especially people who continue to work in these communities, and they're like, okay, like what now, right? How drained can I feel? And I think that there's a lot of power and joy in just getting around a table and being like, I need to cry right now.
Yeah.
Who can hold me? Right. And I think that's something that we talk about a lot, is like, how do we hold each other in community? So I think, like sometimes it's community for the sake of community, but the hope is that it turns out to be something of a movement, right? That people feel like they can participate and be called to this, and that they can align on something, one thing, right? Because if you are, if you grew up low income and you're white, right, and you've been part of all these systems, Section 8, welfare, all this stuff, right? You may have something in common with somebody else, right? That looks very different from you. That's from a very different part of the world, or the city, or even the city that you live in, because as we know, gerrymandering and all this other stuff, right? That you can say, well, I may not agree with everything that this person is saying, but at least we have one thing in common, right? And we can unite across that one thing, and we can do something about that one thing that's affecting all of us. Another part of this is like social responsibility, right? Creating a habit of empathy and social responsibility in your community, where you can look at your neighbor and say, wow, I understand what you're going through, right? And I care about what you're going through.
Yeah.
Right. And I have the responsibility to help you, right? And to do something for you. So I think that's a little bit about like how we hope to move forward, how I hope to continue learning and growing. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, right? And I think that we can do work on an individual level, and as a collective, obviously there's a ton we can do.
And so for anyone watching, for example, and they're like in Nebraska, right? Or they're in California, like very different states. And they don't have a program like this. What would you recommend? I mean, how can someone just begin to identify, this is how I'm going to change my community, or this is how I'm going to create community? What would be like the first basic steps that you try to implement when working with new people to create community? And how can they replicate it wherever they might be if they don't happen to have a Gina or a GenUnity around them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that came to mind was take inventory, right, of yourself, right? Like try to figure out where do you need to grow, where do you need to learn, right? And identify that pain point first, right? So if you're finding yourself like you don't understand a lot of the like the racial issues that the US is going through right now, right? And that's where you want to start, that's okay, right? I think the other thing is realizing that everybody is on a journey, right? We're moving forward. People are dealing through things that are more immediate, right? And are more like survival things, and that's okay. But there are other people that are not, right? And I think that's okay too. But like taking inventory of your surroundings, right? And of yourself and where you need to grow is the first step. I think the second step is identifying, okay, so now that you know where you want to grow, right? Or what you need, it's putting that into action. And that could be very small. I think sometimes people get so bogged down by like, I have to engage, I have to be part of this political thing. And no, you don't. You really don't, right? Like you just need to find something that is comfortable for you to engage and building the habit of engaging, right? So if you have an hour, let's say you have an hour a week and you're like, wow, I really want to learn more about racial equity, right? And I don't know a lot about my family. There's an intersection there, something very interesting there, right? And maybe that hour could be spent you tracing your family lineage if you have the capacity to do that, right? Because some people don't, right? Some people don't know where they come from. And you're saying like, wow, okay, so this goes back this way, right? And some people even engage in trying to understand intergenerational trauma, which is like a whole different thing, right? But that's a step in you healing for the sake of your community. I think some people could also just sit with your neighbor, have a conversation with that neighbor that you always walk past, but you never talk to, right? And something very easy could be, hey, I want to get to know you. I want to ask you a couple questions. Is that okay? You want to have coffee? Right. And from there, you might get an idea to talk to someone else, or you may learn something about your neighbor that you've literally been living next to for years that might surprise you, right? Or might shift the way that you're thinking about something else.
Yep.
The other thing is always seek different spaces, seek to be uncomfortable. And I know that that's hard to do, right? But an hour is not going to kill you. Right? Be uncomfortable for an hour, right? And then you can come away thinking like, okay, I might never do that again, right? So for me, when I was when I was living abroad, right, I was all by myself, and I was like, well, what do I do now? Okay, I want to meet at the intersection of like who I am and try to find other people who are like me, and I tried to understand, okay, where are those people? Like, where can I find them? I started Googling. I saw they had an event. I was going to feel uncomfortable there, right? Because I don't know anybody, and that's okay, right? But it was an hour, right? And then I decided, do I want to do this again, right? And I think oftentimes people get shut down because like, oh no, it's going to be weird. What are we going to talk about? But have something, create something of a bit for yourself, right? So this is going to sound really weird, but like whenever I introduce myself into different spaces, and there's a fun fact, I say that I can clap with one hand. And that's a fun fact that I invented for myself. I practiced that, right? But it was something that I had rehearsed so that I could feel more secure in meeting and like introducing myself to new people, right? And that's a skill. Like that's something that you have to come out of your shell. It's also understanding that if you are not there, you are not there. And that's okay too, right? I think given, this pandemic and like people are processing a lot of things, whether it be grief, depression, anxiety, even, the anxiety of leaving your house and feeling like you might get sick, like those are a lot of different things that people are navigating at the time. So try to make sure that it's something that you can do, that you can engage in, is the most important thing. But I would start with taking inventory. Just look around you, see what's lacking, see where you're full, and see where it could be a little bit better.
Of course. And I think the one thing that, when you take inventory and you decide this is what I want to work on, there's so many books now. And there are so many online communities as well that are there to support. So that is the one good thing about the internet. There are good communities, not just communities that are full of haters. So, you can go online and search, for education and have these conversations online as well if you don't feel comfortable because of your surroundings. The point is, and thank you for that. Yeah, make yourself uncomfortable for an hour. How valuable is that? If we all made ourselves uncomfortable for an hour every week or at least once a month, imagine how much more understanding we would have across the lines. I mean, that is a great, let's all do that. Go make yourself uncomfortable for an hour. That should be a campaign, national campaign.
Absolutely. Make yourself uncomfortable for an hour. You're going to be fine.
Love it. Well, Gina, this has been a fantastic conversation, incredibly enlightening. So thank you for your time. But for anyone who is in Boston or Massachusetts and wants to learn more about your next cohort, how can they find out what the topic is going to be or how to apply to be a fellow?
Yes. So please visit our website, GenUnity.org, right? So GEN Unity, UNITY.org. And you can apply right on the website. We're going to keep updates on, the next cohort that we're going to have that's open. Again, as of right now, our cohorts are virtual, right? So if you're somebody that can't necessarily make it to Boston, there are still ways to engage, right? And all we require is about 2 to 3 hours a week of your commitment over the course of 4 months. And, after that, you can be involved however you want, right? But it's a really cool opportunity to just meet people that don't look like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that you want to learn about somebody that's different from you. So I really encourage you to apply. And if you have any questions or concerns, or you're like trying to figure out if this is for you, don't hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to get to know you too. So,
yeah. And I can attest, like, it's not just going to be the 4 months. You're going to be involved for longer because you really do learn, and it's a fantastic growing experience. And this conversation was just a little taste of what the organization and going through the program is like. So if you are interested, please do visit GenUnity.org and learn more. And like Gina said, stay in touch. Make yourself uncomfortable. That will be your 1 hour this month. Learn about the program and reach out to them.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Bessie.
No, thank you.
This was a joy.